it on this computer.
There it is.
I guess it's going. Hello, Swole Sisters.
Worldwide.
We have just been through an epic journey of Zoom technical difficulties. So this is not live, but it will be raw still.
Raw.
Yeah, whatever that means. Okay. Cool. I have to go back and get into my little document where I wrote all the little notes.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes. We wanted to talk about calorie counting today. The good, the bad, the ugly, what have you.
And Jen, I didn't even ask you if you're currently calorie counting or not.
No, not at all.
Okay.
I'm kind of feel like I'm gearing up to do it because I've reached that point where I'm a little uncomfortable with how I feel. So, I think that I can do that now.
Yeah, well, you mentioned a really good point, which is like how you feel.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Not to say that appearance is, not important, or the way you feel about the way you look is not important, but like just the overall sense of how do you feel. The Beauty Redefined, which I love beautyredefined.org, and I follow them on all of my social media platforms, but they had a great quote, which I'm definitely going to forget the majority of it, but it basically was saying, when you think about this idea of like, oh, I want to lose weight, really think about what is it that you want and try to attack that directly. So, and that's kind of something we've talked about, which is like, we're really looking for a feeling. So when people say like, oh, I feel fat, or I feel like this or whatever, a lot of times it's like, what they're really saying is like, I feel bloated because I'm overeating this particular food on a regular basis, or, I'm drinking too much, so it's making me feel like sluggish, right? So it's like more like, usually like a feeling that we get that we're really trying to either change. So anyway, it's just an interesting way to start out our conversation about numbers.
Let's get to where like that stomach is rolling a little bit more than is comfortable. So, and I know that with a minimal amount of work, I can bring that down back to a more comfortable level for myself. So it's not necessarily about being like super, super lean and perfect, but about like just a few pounds there that make a difference for me. And then when it comes to calorie counting, it can be for many things. So it does not have to be for fat loss. And we are not saying that everybody should count calories. And we're not even saying that you should count calories if you're trying to lose weight. Everyone is going to be different. So I just wanted to preface that. The other thing I wanted to say that I was thinking about that we didn't discuss in our little talk yesterday when we were planning was that there are different times in your life when this may work or not work. So I don't know about you, but I think that in the past, maybe you've tried this and it's not gone as well. And I too have tried it a couple of times in the past, and then I did it again this fall, maybe like with a little more honesty, and it worked for the first time in my life after many, many times of trying it. So if you've tried calorie counting and it hasn't worked for you, is there any different circumstances right now or a different mindset that it might be the right time or not the right time? So, yeah.
I think that's such an amazingly good point, because similarly, I am counting right now for the first time in a very long time with the support and coaching from a therapist. And it's like no other time I've ever done it before. And I think that it just cannot be overstated how much it matters the mindset we're in entering into anything, but specifically when we're talking about food, counting calories, because it can be such an emotionally loaded thing. And when not done in a thoughtful, skillful way, it can be a really negative experience, which is what I have. I've definitely been there multiple times throughout my life where I was counting in an unskillful way. I'll put it that way. Or out of, go ahead.
So what was the repercussions of that? Like, how did you feel?
Well, and we'll get into some of this stuff, you know, when we go through the pros and cons, but one of the cons was just that I was like an utter slave to the numbers and they dictated everything to me. And if I went over, I felt horrible. I felt ashamed and just awful about myself. And if I stayed under, I felt like I was a good person and all of that. But I also, even when I was like doing well, there was always this underlying anxiety of like, well, you can't keep this up and it's just a matter of time before you're going to fuck it up, So even when I was like under, because it's always about being under, when you're counting in the ways that I was counting, which was out of self-loathing and like, hating my body and wanting to shrink my body. Even when I was doing well or under my calories, it was like, I couldn't even, it wasn't even like I was really enjoying that because there was always the like, well, when is this going to blow up in your face and you're just going to binge. Right. So I, at that time was in a binge cycle, which was like most of my 20s and teens. So that was it just, yeah.
Yeah, for me, what I would do is I would do a couple things. I was just kind of like, I think, in denial about everything. So we're going to talk about this as data. And I just did not want to look at the data. I didn't want to look at the numbers. So the first thing I would do would be manipulate the numbers to, I wanted them to be, whether that meant if I picked a recipe, maybe I picked like the lower calorie version, even if I knew that probably what I was eating was more than that. Or like just like underestimate the serving size. Oh, sure, that was an ounce of cheese. It wasn't 2 ounces of cheese. Like that was only a half a tablespoon of olive oil. It wasn't a full tablespoon of olive oil. So I would manipulate things. And then the second thing that I would do, and this has been, I think, one of the things that has always kept me from seeing some consistent results, was just not track on the weekends. So good. Friday comes along. It's time for a treat. Oh, I ate that. I don't feel like tracking that. I just don't want to even look at it. It's like, that doesn't happen. So then I would go 2.5 to 3 days of not tracking. And that's like a huge chunk of your week. So you can have those 4 days that look perfect and be like, I eat perfectly, but you're only eating perfectly like 2/3 of the time. And that's just not enough. So that was, my experience with that.
So I love what you said, because this just reminds me of something that I used to do, and I have not been this time, but the honesty, if you're not ready to be honest and really look at the data, then do not track your calories, because that is like paramount for you to be successful in your tracking or to like get anything out of it. Really, it's like you're not going to get anything out of it if you're not being, it's like going to therapy, but like lying to your therapist, right? It's like, you're not going to get anything out of it, I mean, not that you won't get anything, but it's going to be, minimal. But I used to, if I would overeat, so I would have all day of doing like really, really well. And then at night I would like have some kind of like indulgence, and I would go back through all of my food I put in and like do that, be like, well, was that really a whole tablespoon? And I would go through and deduct, and then I would ramp up, because at this time we're going to talk about this because this is another thing we didn't discuss prepping yesterday, but we'll get to it. I would also go into my exercise and add, right? So instead of like 300 calories from my whatever workout, I would add like 100 calories. It was insane. Like, what in the world was I trying to accomplish with that? It's just so bizarre, the behavior around it,
And we should say that if you're going to track your calories, I never suggest that you add your workouts in there. So
yeah, I have this down because I wrote this in. Because we didn't really talk about it. That being said, like yesterday, I did the yoga for paddlers, which was, I feel like it's quite strenuous. And then we did a walk run that ended up being 45 minutes, which was way longer than I anticipated. I was trying to keep it around 30 minutes. And then by the time we got done, it was like 45 minutes of this interval running. And I was like ravenously hungry, and I was like, what is going on? I've already like, looking at the numbers, I'm like, Jesus, I already have consumed like 3/4 of what I would like to for the whole day. And I needed to take that into account, say, hey, you're, like you expended a ton of energy today. I haven't run in ever months. I mean, I just don't really run, but so that was important for me though, to take that into account, say, hey, you're hungry. That makes sense. Like, look at all the stuff that you did today. So what do you recommend around that? So you're saying don't take into account the number, because, I mean, you can talk about that. I think I know what you're going to say, but first I have a question. Why not? And shouldn't we take it into account, right? I mean, if you're expending more energy, shouldn't we give ourselves more leeway to eat more? Go.
So usually on like MyFitnessPal, you're putting in your like weekly estimate of your activity level. So you've already included how much you work out in there. So when they're calculating those calories and you say you're like, relatively active or whatever, so that's already kind of been considered in there.
Yeah.
The other thing, the calorie burning estimates are notoriously incorrect, even if you have like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or any of that stuff. And then we get into that method, that idea that you're like earning your food through your workout. So that can be a dangerous place to be. So you're either punishing yourself by overeating and exercising, or using it as an excuse to overeat because you exercise so hard. And it does, like, as far as data goes, it really shows you that just adding more workouts, it's really hard to keep your calories down. So if you're trying to lose weight and you're like, I'm just going to work out more, you're just going to be hungrier and eat more too. So like adding more and more and more isn't always the case, because you're going to be battling that hunger and setting yourself up for binging later, or just total frustration. So that's why when people are like, well, I need to do more exercise, like, yes, if you are currently not working out, adding a few days a week of exercise can make a difference. But if you have a pretty solid habit, like just more intense exercise isn't necessarily, it's going to make it harder for you to eat less.
Yes. So that is those three things that Jen mentioned, we will post, because I think they're so important. It'll be part of a series of posts that we'll do throughout the week around this subject, but that is so important. So just to recap, already taken into account, you're an active person. That's how they calculate your calories. Number one. Number two, it's wildly inaccurate. And number three, like Jen said, so important, the mindset around, oh, I reward myself when I exercise, I restrict and withhold from myself when I don't. And that is not a healthy connection to be making in your brain. So important. Perfectly well said, Jen. You rock.
Now, that being said, taking note that you are extra hungry because you've had some extra activity isn't the end of the world.
Totally.
And yeah, you can, in those cases, strategically eat those foods that fill you up more. Yep. So you can have protein, you can have foods with lots of water in them, vegetables, lots of fiber. So those things can help you without increasing your calories a ton too.
Yeah. And I think that this segues nicely into one of our other tips. And again, these tips will all be posted in a much more organized fashion than we're going to be going over them, which is that looking at, so one of the things was that, last night, technically I went over, right, whatever, the number that MyFitnessPal thinks I should be eating, but the day before, when I didn't actually have any strenuous exercise, I was under, right? So what I'm getting at is looking at the trend of the numbers over weeks and months is so much more beneficial, not just from a logistical standpoint of using the data strategically, but also from a psychological standpoint. It's so much. So when I can look back over the week or the month or whatever weeks of tracking, averaging the calorie intake, over that amount of time, that's really where the riches are in the data and in the information that you're getting from the tracking itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you can kind of think of it as like instead of your allotted daily calorie budget, you can think of it more as a weekly one because there will be days where you eat less and days where you eat more. And you can also start to look at things about like how your life goes and what you prefer. So some people might actually like to restrict a little more during the week and then have more calories on the weekend. For me, that's not going to work because I think I'll just overdo it. So when I do some calorie cycling, I'll try to have 3 days of the week that might be like a couple hundred calories more, and 4 days of the week that would be lower. So that's kind of like one way. And other people may find that they just want to eat the same the whole week. And this is all part of like collecting information for you personally and seeing what works best for you.
Yeah, I think that that's another really important point is there's no one size fits all, just like everything. You really, and this is part of why it's a beneficial practice is that this is under the pros that we came up with, which is you are learning about yourself, right? Like Jen said, when I first got into calorie counting this time with my therapist, Jen was like, mentioned, I was premenstrual at the time, and I think you were just like, hey, just like be aware that like you're probably gonna, eat more. And just, I mean, that sounds so obvious, but like we become so rigid and so lacking of compassion around our needs, especially as women. The old me would have just been like devastated. I wouldn't have taken into account and had the compassionate understanding towards myself to say, yeah, man, like you're tired, like you're going through this time of the month, like we know what's going to happen. It happens every freaking month. It's not a big surprise. And to have that softness of heart to, allow for the extra calories because 5 days down the line, I'll be not eating that way, right? So it's like having that trust where you're going to be going through a cycle and knowing that it's not always going to be this way, but also knowing on days when you're like, wow, I feel so energized and like, look at me, I only had, for me, 1,600 calories. Oh my goodness. It's not always going to be that way either though. And you have to like, it's such a helpful practice to get into. And because you must allow for fluctuations, and
Mhm.
it's just like, duh, but it's so hard for us.
Yeah, I mean, it can give you good practice for like trying to get out of judging yourself. And then maybe the next step is being able to not look at the scale number in a judgmental way. Like, so practicing it with the calories could carry over to other parts of your life. So
Yes.
that could be
I
good.
also wanted to mention when you talked about like not going day by day, but thinking about it more as a caloric intake for the week, which is the reason why that's helpful too is like you're not going to gain weight in one freaking day. And it just drives me crazy. And I try not to get frustrated with some clients, but like it just makes me crazy when people like are like, oh, I weighed myself, I'm 3 pounds more than I was yesterday, and I'm like, it's not that it doesn't matter because probably you are like, you need to go to the bathroom or like whatever, those things are important, but like you're not like, that's just not physiologically like how the body works.
Right.
um
Yeah,
so
exactly. I mean, a pound of fat is 3,500 extra calories.
that's the average.
Yeah, so that 3,500 times 3. You did not eat 10,500 extra calories.
Yes. So let's get into our list here so we can kind of stay on track ever so slightly. um
Okay.
So let's go over some of the pros of calorie counting. So the first one that Jen and I came up with was learning that you can have the foods you enjoy and that you can detach these kind of moral labels around food.
Hmm. Yes, so that it's a budget. So I think that goes usually with carbs, but also for some people with fat. And this assumption that carbs are bad, or fat is bad, and you can't eat it, and you need to restrict it. And then when you look at your calories and more like a budget, you can actually be like, okay, well, I really like pasta. Like Justine likes pasta. Well, what happens if I actually measure my pasta and have a real serving of it, I can probably fit it into my calories. So then there aren't any foods that are off limits. Yes, there are ones that are going to be really hard to like, still eat within your calories, but then the whole world opens up to you. And like carbs don't make you fat. And on the hierarchy of things that matter when it comes to whether or not you're gaining or losing or staying the same with your weight, calories are the most important thing. Calories are the most important thing. And it doesn't, I mean, it will help you to keep your calories lower to eat certain ways, but like in a vacuum, just calories. So you can have a piece of bread, it's just how much bread do you have and what else did you eat that day? And that's kind of freeing in a way.
I totally agree, and I am experiencing that as somebody who comes from a extreme scarcity mindset around food, which led to binging for me. I've actually been really shocked at how well I've handled it, because I have done the measuring out of the 2 ounces of rotini pasta, and I'm like, this isn't enough. This isn't enough. Like, that's what I'm thinking in my mind. I'm getting anxious. This is not enough. This isn't going to be enough. And I just said to myself, Justine, just eat it. Like, and I cut up some sausages. I put in some big, real chunky sauteed mushrooms too. So like I got some other volume into it, and some Parmesan cheese. And I just ate it slowly. And by the time I was done, I could have cooked some more. I told myself, just if you want more, we'll just cook some more pasta. You know what I mean? But I only cooked and boiled the serving size. And by the time I was done eating it, I felt good. I felt satiated. And that's the proof, right? So for somebody like myself, I think a lot of people are like this. Like, I have a lot of trust building to do with myself. So I have to have these conversations a lot where I look at portions, the serving size. I'm like, there's no way we're going to be hungry. Oh, and I get so freaked out. It's like, okay, just eat the serving size. And then if you're still hungry, we will eat more, but don't immediately, right? So it's about just give yourself the chance to experience what is it like to have the serving size. If after you have it, wait 15 minutes. If you're still like, you know what, I'm hungry, then get more for yourself. But I can tell you that has been very rarely the case for me. Generally, after I eat, wait a little while, and I'm like, I'm good. And I've had it. I feel psychologically, not just physically satiated, but I also feel like emotionally, like I gave myself something that I enjoy, like, and it feels good. It's feeling really good. I'm in the midst of it, guys. I'm in it right now. Yeah, eyeballs deep.
I think that helps you like not overeat later, when you have like, I've always been in favor of that. And sometimes that means for me finding smaller portions of things so that I don't have like a whole big portion. So like a whole frozen pizza for me is problematic because I'm not going to just eat the portion size, but if I can find a little one, I'll be happy because I got to eat that and they're easy to do. So
yes, and I've taken your advice about that, because at the Price Chopper, right at the checkout, were all of these assorted 100-calorie candy bars. So they had Dove chocolate, they had Twix, they had Milky Way, they had Snickers, and every single one was an individually packed 100-calorie one. And I was like, oh my God, they were like 50 cents each. So I bought like 10, 15 of them. And that's been really, really helpful for me.
So you've been able to eat one of those and then not go back and have another.
Nice. Yeah, and I keep it above, like they're hard, a little bit hard. I can get to them, but they're not in my vision. Like I have to go get them. They're on top of the fridge. And I just make sure to only take one with me at a time. I think there was only one night where I took one, I opened it, I ate it in silence, not while doing anything. I was like, ate it, like took my time. And then I think there was one night where I was like, I'm going to get another one of these. And I had another one, but only one night so far.
Only 200 calories. And then like, so when we talk about vilifying foods, people vilify fruit a lot. And I really honestly, I really doubt that if you're not achieving your goals, it's because of fruit. I am like almost positive there's something else in there. So I wanted to take, for example, because usually an apple is about 80 calories. This happens to be like the biggest apple.
That's like ever. As big as your head, Jen.
It is. So I want to call this like a 90-calorie apple, okay? Or let's, for the sake of it, let's call this a 100-calorie apple.
It could
This
be.
apple is 100 calories. These two tiny little York peppermint patties together are 100 calories. Now tell me, how easy do you think it would be to maybe eat 6 of these? There's 300 calories. Do you think you're gonna eat 3 of these giant apples? Like, just the amount of chewing alone.
That's hilarious.
I just doubt that fruit is the problem. Now, if you feel like you have been like very good with your calories and you're like looking for a place to maybe drop a little bit, and if you're having, maybe you have 2 different kinds of fruit in your smoothie and you want to drop it down to 1, that could make a difference, but there may be something else a little more glaring than that.
Absolutely. And that comes down to the honesty part of things. So another pro that we mentioned this many times already in this episode, but it's the seeing the numbers as data and detaching that morality around it, and like, this is good, this is bad. So we've talked a lot about that already. Do you want to add anything to that, Jen?
No, I think that's good. It's information. This is all just information. And I think, like, whenever I have people track food, even if they're just writing it down and not tracking the calories, before I like look at it and make my judgment of it, I'm just like, what did you notice when you did that? And a lot of times people will be like, well, I noticed I don't eat a lot of vegetables. And it's like, okay, like right there, let's just, you just don't know till you look at it. So it can help, which brings, I guess, to like the macronutrient idea.
Go for it. Yeah.
So it can also bring to light a couple of numbers that are good to look at. Your protein, like how high is your protein? A lot of times they'll be like, oh, do you eat protein? Oh yeah, I eat an egg for breakfast. And then all of a sudden, and you're like, and cheese and peanut butter. And then all of a sudden you look at the numbers and you're like, oh, an egg is like 4 grams of protein. And like, oh, that peanut butter is like 3 grams of protein compared to chicken that might be like 20 grams of protein. So not that any of these foods are bad, but like, oh, maybe you're not actually getting as much protein as you think.
Which also is important. Not, higher protein foods lead to higher satiety. Yeah.
High satiety.
Higher satiety. Wait, that word is so dumb. There should be a different word. Jen, that's hilarious. That's another really important part, not just for like muscle synthesis and all of that, but also you're just going to feel fuller and more satisfied for longer. So it serves a few purposes with the protein.
Yeah. And another number I look at, I don't know if you look at this number at all, but fiber. So like,
don't look at the fiber. I should.
Yeah. So that's a good one to look at. And I think a lot of women are not super regular. Like,
don't even get me started. We should have a whole poop episode. That's what I say.
Things move a little slower. And I know there are exceptions, and I know some people have stomach issues and stuff, so maybe they can't eat as much fiber. So this, that would be an exception. But, that trying to hit that 25 grams or more of fiber as a woman. So that's another number that's helpful to look at.
Mm-hmm.
So now we got something for you to check out. Although you eat a lot of veggies, I bet your fiber is good.
I eat a lot of fruit and a lot of vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
More fruit than vegetables, to be honest. So planning ahead for pleasure eating. So that is I think of that as a pro. When you really are looking at things without denial, this is actually a really cool thing to be able to do. Like if I am going to work at the pizza place and I know that I want to have pizza, I'll just keep that in mind. And it doesn't always work. Sometimes I'll end up eating, just as many calories as when I go in and I'm like, well, whatever, I'm just going to be over today. It's not the end of the world because I just want to have that pizza. But it's kind of cool to be able to plan ahead a little bit. And I would have always seen that again, this is why mindset is so important, because I went through, flip-flop from somebody that was so restrictive and whatever, obsessed. And then I went the opposite direction where it's like, no one should count calories and we should all just be intuitive eating and blah, 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 which whatever, we can talk about that another time. So I would have seen this as like planning ahead for an indulgent meal is like, that's like you have an eating disorder. Like I honestly, that's how I would have seen it. Like, oh, you should see a therapist. Like there's probably something like going on. Now, again, if we're really able to detach from qualitatively looking and just looking quantifiably at the numbers, it makes a lot of sense.
Right. It's a budget. It's
exactly.
The same way that you would save up to be able to spend money on a big dinner, you'd save your calories.
Yeah, and that is genius. Amazing. Cool. And I mean, this goes without saying, we're kind of just talking about this as we're going, but it's an education, really, and knowledge is power. And that's kind of what I mean when I talk, about myself building trust with myself, because I had so many years, over a decade, of not trusting myself. And that was it. The self-doubt and the lack of trust led to so many emotional, issues and self-loathing and shame and all of this. And it's been so empowering just learning and really looking it in the eye, because that was the thing. It was like I was afraid of it and I just wanted to like, no, I don't want to know. I don't want to see, right? Like Jen said, it's like, you need, that honesty within the tracking is really the key. And then once you have all the data and the knowledge, it's quite empowering. You're like, oh, maybe I could take some action around this.
Yes. Yeah. And I think, are we ready to go into the cons?
Yes.
Okay. So that kind of brings us to that we kind of spoke about in the beginning, that you might need to be at the right time in your life to do this. And it might not be your life. And emotionally, if you feel like maybe you can get too hyper-focused and maybe now isn't the time to count calories, or now is the time to work with a therapist. And that might be the better thing to do than to try to count calories on your own.
Yes. And speaking of therapy, another major contraindication, I think, is, any history of eating disorder. Do not try to do this by yourself. It might not even be anything that you will ever be recommended, would be right for you to do. And that's something, go to a therapist. I can tell you that, and I posted about this, but I had never seen a therapist until now. I'm 34 years old. This is the first time I have ever addressed my eating issues with a professional. And I can tell you it's fucking awesome. And I'm so happy I did it. And I don't think, oh, I wish I had done this years ago, because I just wasn't ready. And I am now. I'm open to it. I wouldn't have been then. And that's just how life is, right? It's like, you got to go through what you go through. And now here I am, and I'm ready, to handle it and deal with it and look at it. So yes, professionals.
We did talk about some people, A, don't like the tech, or B, just don't feel like looking at a screen anymore. So counting calories might just seem time consuming, something that you're knowledge-wise not familiar with doing. So it's okay if you want to skip it, if that's the case.
Totally. And like what Jen said in the beginning, it's not for everyone, and that's all right. Yeah. And then the other thing, again, this might just be, but being the type of person who can get kind of enslaved in the numbers, that might just be an indication that you're not ready, or it's just not for you. But what that can do is it can shut off your hunger cues, right? Because you're like, well, now I shall eat my 350 calorie allotted lunch. And then you might even be not hungry and you're eating it. And then, or you eat it and you're still hungry, but you're like, nope, that's what it said to eat. So that's it, so that's could be problematic as well. And only you have the answer to, if you're ready and if it's right for you.
Yeah, I think that's great. Was there anything else on the cons? I can't remember.
Nope.
Okay. Cool.
Let's I do want to go into some of the tips. We'd mentioned seeing the trend over weeks and months, not days. Um, the fluctuations and planning on seeing those fluctuations, not letting it scare you. I know with, it annoys me. I'm using my Fitness Pal, and you have to have a calorie goal. And I'm like, it'd be really cool if there wasn't one, but there is one. So I've learned to, deal with that. Practicing compassion and curiosity around what you're finding. We've talked about that. Checking your motives is a big one. That's mindset. And what I like that we talked about yesterday, Jen, was the idea of like the steps. And I can tell you, this is kind of the steps I went through, which is first, before you start tracking any calories, just like in a journal, in the note sections of your phone, just write down what you are consuming. Anytime you put something in your mouth, write it down. No calories, no numbers, just write that down and see how that feels over 10 days to 2 weeks. And I did that. And then at that point, if you move on to tracking calories with not necessarily having any kind of goal around it or number in your mind or anything like that, just tracking the calories of what it is, and then from there moving to perhaps having a goal in mind to begin to shape your food intake around.
Yes, yeah, I think those are good steps to take. It's like building momentum with it.
Mm-hmm.
getting used to part of the habit before you like actually make it a bigger habit. And then just the idea that maybe in the beginning the actual act of tracking is your goal, not the calorie number. So think about that as your goal. If you were to write down my goal today is not to eat 1,600 calories. My goal today is to track the food that I eat.
Absolutely. And it's such a good point. It's incremental, right? It's like, instead of doing everything at once, track, count, have a goal, meet the goal, right? That's 4 things, for goodness sakes, right? One thing at a time.
And then the other thing to remember is that you can control your actions, but you cannot control the outcomes. And that is just another, like, when you get on that scale and maybe you feel like your actions should have put you somewhere else, there is no should have put you somewhere else. You don't have control over that. So you can look at the data and you can see how it is, and maybe you need more time. Like if you gave it a week, like chance to see big results in that week. If you've been doing it for months but you don't feel like you've achieved the goals that you wanted to, like really, like how consistent were you? If you go back on those days, do you start to miss like a couple days in a week, or maybe there's a week where you completely fell off? Those are all days where you're probably overeating, and you're in your head, you're like, no, I still ate well, it was fine. But it's like, if those other days where you tracked and it was pretty accurate, like those are the days, those sneaky little days where you chose not to track.
Absolutely. And I did write down sips, bites, and tastes.
No,
this is actually a concept. What?
BLTs.
Yes.
Bites, licks, and tastes.
Yes. Yeah. So I had sips because could be part of it. But anyway, BLTs. Yeah, there's an S on the end. Anyway, so I actually learned this from a client of mine who had lost over 100 pounds. And that was one of the, things that they talked about a lot. She was part of a support group, and it was quite organized, but what she went through. And I loved that idea, because this idea that like you track anytime, I forget what my therapist calls it, but it's like a food episode, right? Anytime anything goes in your mouth, that's what she said, you have to track it. So that includes, if you're cooking a meal and you taste that Alfredo sauce 6 times, or like you're making, some French fries in the toaster oven for your kids, and you're, hey, think about that over a whole day. If you're the primary person cooking for the home, or maybe even not, I mean, you're just cooking for yourself and it's a little bit here, a little bit there, that can add up. So that kind of goes into what Jen's saying, which is like, if you're like, I don't understand, like it's been months and I've been so dedicated. It's like, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but it's like, I bet if you really were accurately looking and counting, and you're really without judgment, without, blinders on and rose colored glasses looking at that data, you're probably going to find that you probably just weren't tracking accurately.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
Well, this has been a great discussion. I have a client at 1:10, so I do have to sign off, but this was awesome.
Okay.
Rich
Cool.
with information.
Yeah, I get passionate about this one. I have a lot of opinions about this one.
I'm just excited because, Jen knows this, but I was like completely like unwilling to even work with anyone. Like I just was like, I can't deal with this. Like I can't deal with clients that want to like meal plan and weight loss and count calories. I really just wouldn't even work with anyone. I mean, some of my clients have weight loss goals, but that's largely something that they do either with somebody else, like a nutritionist. We all talk to them about it, but I don't give any advice. Like I'm completely detached from that. But I can tell you that as I've been doing it myself, it builds confidence in me as a coach to help other people. So it's definitely something that normally I'd say, all right, Jen, like this is your wheelhouse. Like I don't need to talk about it, want to talk about it. Yeah, now I feel differently. So it's kind of fun to be opening that up as a subject matter for me personally and professionally.
Yeah, I mean, I think anything that you're trying is a learning tool.
Mm-hmm.
So even we can look back at all of the diets that we've done and all of the craziness, and we would just learn from it. You know what I mean? So if anything you're doing, if you're just like, what can I gain from this? And that's a good positive, what's the word there? Growth mindset.
Totally.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. Jen, you're awesome. Miss you.
You're awesome.
Your hair is amazing today.
I know. I like it. I feel good.
You're like, okay. All right, everybody. Take care, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.